Hello, everyone. Welcome to this show. We're talking about inverters today. And you might ask yourself why I have a brain here in my left hand. I have a brain here because inverters are the brain of a solar system. And that's what we're going to discuss today. Inverters, a couple of years ago, probably no one really knew what it is. But as the solar sector is growing and as solar is becoming the key electricity source in Europe, everyone should know more about inverters. And this is why I'm here with some experts today who will tell us more about why inverters are important and what is also necessary in order, first of all, having an industry, a sizable industry here in Europe, but also what they do and what we need on a regulatory scale, what kind of regulation we do need. So let me introduce the experts first. So we have from SMA, Katharina Eickelberg, who is the Senior Vice President of Global Communication and Sustainability. Welcome. Then from Fronius, the CEO of Fronius, Elisabeth Engelbrechtsmüller-Strauß. Welcome. From Enphase, we have Jaron Gordon, who is Vice President of Microinverter, the microinverter business. And then from dcbel, on my right side, Laurent Schmitt, who is Head of Utilities and European Development. And last but not least, from SolarEdge, we have Jaron Schaechter, Vice President of the strategy of SolarEdge. And one person I have not introduced yet is Kerstin Jorna. Very well welcome, Director General of DG GROW of the European Commission. We've just done a tour through the exhibition. And we have already talked a little bit about inverters. The European Commission has just presented an industrial strategy. So what is the importance for the European Commission of inverters?
They are really part of the whole system. You can call it brain or you can give it another name, but it's part of the whole system. And what we learn is when we want to really create that new energy system, that renewable energy system that brings affordable green energy at the factory gate in abundance, then we need inverters and we need to see them as part of the picture. They may be tiny, they may be very technical. When I said to my children AC/DC, they said, yeah, vaguely I heard something about this, but it was nothing to do with the inverter business. So I think it's time to shine a light on it and shine a light on how important it is. And I'm very happy to have this discussion today and learn more.
Before we're going into the details, what's your general impression from the show here, from the trade fair?
I was surprised how active it is. My last trade fair was the Hanover Fair this year, where I went, and I think there's a lot of dynamics, a lot of interest for solar solutions. It speaks to everybody, and I also saw a great array of really, very innovative solutions. So I think it's where the beat is taking place.
Very good. Thanks a lot. So we heard it is important, it's the brain of the solar system, but what is it exactly? And why do inverters matter? Elisabeth, tell us more about it.
Yes, you have already explained that. I always say the inverter is the brain of a solar system. Very often forgotten because we think PV is just modules, but the inverter is not just converting AC to DC, it also manages the energy flow. And it collects a lot of data. So what you can do, it's important, especially for the transmission of energy, that you not just produce energy, that you also use it where it would be good if you use most of it when where you produce it. And therefore, it's necessary that you make it possible that you store it or that you transport it into the grid. The inverter makes it also possible to support the grid. And therefore, it's really a very important key element for the transformation of energy.
It is important for just getting the energy transition done. You forgot one point? Okay.
I forgot one very important point, because I think it's why we are sitting here is especially also we always talk about that the module production should go to Europe, but we completely forget about inverters. And I explained that the data is collected in inverters, and it's a key for the energy sovereignty of Europe. And it supports the transition of the energy, and therefore you already explained that it's high technology, and I think it would be really a big problem if we would let this technology just to China. If we do a Green Deal just with products not coming from Europe, it would be really a problem. And when we forget about this component, we get more and more dependent.
Thanks very much for making the bridge to Katharina, because my question to Katharina is, what is the economic value indeed of the inverter industry, and why does it matter to have the industry in Europe?
Yeah. Thanks, Walburga. Right now, we have a production capacity in Europe for inverters of 60 gigawatts. So we already have quite a bit of capacity installed here. But of course, the industry is growing, and the inverter industry is growing with us or with this. So we at SMA, we just broke ground for a new gigawatt factory where we're adding 20 gigawatt to the mix, so that we will, as one company alone, be able to produce 40 gigawatt. And I think that is something that, again, we are sometimes forgetting. The situation is not as desperate as with the module. So we have a good inverter industry in Europe, but we have lost quite a bit of market share in the last years. And I think it's about high time that we start upping our game a bit in that sense. The second point I want to make is that we really are a job motor in Europe as well. So the renewable industry creates a lot of jobs. Within that renewable industry, solar jobs are the majority. And of that solar jobs in Europe, 70% are actually jobs in and around inverter manufacturing. So around 30,000 people in 2021, at least that was the figure, work in or around the inverter industry in Europe. So that's a big factor as well. So there's two hard economic factors, but I want to make one point that is, I think, that also has a value, and that is resilience, sustainability, and independency. And I think you have made that point already. Do we really want to be as dependent as we are right now in the supply chains when it comes to our energy supply? And I think this is something that we really need to tackle, because right now we are heavily dependent on China when it comes to the materials and the products that we are building into our inverters. And I think we really should grab the opportunity sort of by the hair to reduce that dependency that we have.
Thanks a lot, Katharina. So we need to keep the industry here. It's a huge job motor, and we need to become more resilient. So what are the concerns, digging a little bit more deeper into it? What are the concerns, and maybe asking SolarEdge first, Enphase first about the concerns that you have. So what is it that is needed in order to keep the industry here? What is it that we need in order to have inverters play the role to its fullest that we need inverters to play?
The inverters, as was discussed, not only do they convert the DC to the AC, and the different companies do it in a different way. The amount of data that gets collected is tremendous, right? Probably safe to say that the inverter companies know far more about the grid than any of the grid companies, right? You measuring multiple times a second on every house that you have an inverter installed. So you have all this tremendous amount of data coming out of the inverters. And one of the keys is that, is it safe? Or is it secure? Are you the way we need to do? Think about cybersecurity. We think about that in the communication realm, but now it's like in the power generation. There's a tremendous amount of cybersecurity that could become vulnerable. So the idea of cybersecurity and then doing it in a smart way, right? Because you can, go overboard and make it so that you can't bring products to market because you have to go through a 9-month cybersecurity. So we're very much pro cybersecurity, and we're actually very good at it. but we want to make it so it's a smart implementation of that cybersecurity. So, the manufacturing that gets done, we do manufacturing in the EU now, which we're very proud about doing. We do manufacturing in the US. And then, from the initial manufacturing all the way through the lifetime of the product, how it collects, how you store the data, and making sure that you don't get caught up in something from a bad actor.
Cybersecurity, does that need to be part of Europe's industrial strategy, just as a side question?
I think anytime that you're really dealing with the infrastructure, whether it's communication, power generation, utilities, cybersecurity always has to be a concern. And you can't ever be perfect, but you need to make it as difficult as possible. And so it is really a key thing to look at who has the data, where's the data being stored, are they following the rules, and then going forward in that manner.
Jaron, you already mentioned it is contributing very much to the grids and the challenges we have in the grids. So I want to ask you now, Laurent, grid stability, what do we need? How do inverters contribute to grid stability?
Yeah, thanks for inviting us to this very interesting discussion. What I would say is inverters are not only the brain of the solar part, but they are also the distributed brains of the future grids, in the sense that what we see, grids are changing with more and more congestion, simply because the speed of growth in the PV industry, in the EV industry, is much faster than what we can do in expanding grids. And as a consequence, what we see is we need to reinvent some of these grid connections in being able to basically be smarter, flexible, manage congestions, and even go one step further in the future and manage grid stability from a voltage point of view. Because, of course, when we project the grid in 2035, 2050 in Europe, there will be almost no more rotating machines. So the power electronics will take over, I would say. And so what I want to say here, there's also a lot of innovation which come into the inverter industry. We are a small startup, so a bit different element from that point of view. And we are looking at also Europe as a way to industrialize our ideas. We are a French-Canadian startup. And the environment of having strong power module suppliers, power electronics, is very positive. The other element I would like to add on cybersecurity is the element of the data protection, data hacks, because when you are in a residential environment, the inverter also has a lot of private data, I would say indirectly into. And so I think it's very important to think on this future inverter in terms of European data space and new concept which emerge into the digitalization as what we hear from the new regulations, whether the connection code, whether the implementing it on data interoperability and so on. On each of these regulations, I would say the inverter has a small piece of the jigsaw to be brought into this industry. So it is really a critical technology moving forward.
So there's great opportunities that inverters can bring to the grid challenge, but inverters also need to be heard when it comes to all these codes and regulations that are developed. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. And then there's data operability. Looking to you, Jaron. Can you tell us more about what needs to happen when it comes to data operability?
Yes, so we discussed a lot about the inverter being the brain of the system, and it is the brain of the system, but we need to recognize that the world is moving towards a full solution, and the full solution is hiding behind the inverter. So you now have storage. In Germany, we're at 80% storage attach rates. You have the bidirectional car coming into the game, so all of a sudden you have big batteries on wheels that can drive around. You have the fastest growing market in Germany right now is the CNI space, so commercial customers in that regard. So you need to look at data, and you need to look also at the smartness of the grid on all of these different levels. And so to jump back onto the earlier point with regards to grid resilience, we need to recognize that a grid that can hold 200% renewables is what we should aim for. So not just 100. If we want to reach 100, we need to have more than 100% and be ready for that. In order to get there, we need the data side, we need the smartness, we need the intelligence, we need the connectivity. And we need to do that in a safe way. And we need to realize the inverter is the brain of that system, but basically everything below it will also be connected via the inverter or be regulated via the inverter, depending on the times that smart energy is available. And that will be grid friendly. And in terms of industrial politics, I strongly believe that the DSOs, the grid operators, need to be part of the equation, but also big infrastructure takes a lot of time to build. And we as an industry, we are already moving ahead. We are creating the smartness every single day.
Thanks a lot, Jaron, for transitioning back to industrial strategy, which indeed is something I want to end with, because we discussed a lot about the whole day, throughout the whole day already, what it is that it's needed in order to have sustainable supply chains, not just supply chains in Europe, but sustainable supply chains also because Europe is very good when it comes to sustainability. So, Katharina, back to you. So what is needed in order to have those sustainable supply chains? We understood that there's still a lot of business taking place in Europe, but we need to keep it. And what is it that we need?
Well, let me just maybe to start with state a bit of an inconvenient truth, if you want. We're actually fighting an uphill battle right now. The European inverter industry is losing market share in the last years tremendously. And that is not because we are not competitive, but it is because we don't have a level playing field to compete on. And we talked about this before already. So there are a couple of concerns indeed that we have. One is that our supply chains are vulnerable, and when it comes to sustainability, I think there is a lot that needs to be done still to really make sure that we get down to the raw materials and the products that we use for our inverters to be really green and really sustainable. The second thing is, and we talked about this already before as well, is easy access to finance, which is just a hurdle right now and a concern that we have. And one thing that is maybe not tied to sustainability as much, but one thing that we also see is that we are in Europe starting to lose our innovative edge, if you want, or our innovative USP. Because our Chinese competitors, they're actually not producing the worst product. They're actually producing quite good products, unfortunately. So we really need to make a joint effort to keep R&D here, to invest in innovation, and to be able to still have that competitive advantage. And building up supply chains, sustainable supply chains, is a task that is relevant for the whole sector. It's not only inverters, it's the modules and everything that is connected to it. And I think there are a couple of measures that could maybe help in doing that. I think we definitely need a European raw material strategy so that we really get a firm grip on reducing our dependency on China. One idea, just spilling it out there, could be to look into strategic partnerships with the Global South. Is there something to be gained there, again, to reduce the dependency on China? We need financial support and reduce bureaucracy for financing projects. And again, we need more R&D capacities to not lose our competitive edge here.
Thanks a lot, Katharina. Is there anyone who wants to add something to the list that Katharina has already been...
I think it's not just R&D. We also need the manufacturing here in Europe, because manufacturing also has an influence on the innovation and on the R&D. And I think US really realized that. So they made this Inflation Reduction Act, and we in Europe, we don't think about that. So I think it's really necessary that we use the Green Deal for industrialization of the European industry and not for deindustrialization of the industry. And I'm really a bit concerned about what's going on now, because we have this wonderful Intersolar, but we have a lot of competitors coming from other countries than from European countries, and they are gaining market shares with subsidies paid by Europe.
If I may just add also on the cybersecurity and cloud element, all this data which gets connected to this inverter, depending on the places where they are manufacturers, sometimes flow outside Europe. And I think that should also be considered as part of the strategy in making sure this inverter data stays in European clouds. And that should be part of our data strategy overall. So I hope we can achieve that good level of cybersecurity as what we discussed is the new cybersecurity network code as an example.
I strongly believe we're not yet in a European industry either. There's some markets in Europe that are ahead, that are very, very strong, but there's so many other European countries that are not yet fully showing up on the map. So I believe there's a lot that Europe can do to really, and it's something that I as a citizen wish for myself from Europe a lot as well, is like, if we were to really act as Europeans on the outside, towards the outside world, there's a lot we can do. But within Europe, we are always falling back into the nation state. But if we were to just, from looking at this industry, if we were to just pull up additional countries into the renewable energy transformation, into solar, into storage, into e-mobility, if we would accelerate that, then I think Europe as a whole also becomes a much stronger domestic market. And we are one of the most interesting playing fields in the world, and then I think our future in terms of innovation can be very strong.
I agree that the Europeans, I'm an American, so the Europeans, they don't act very European, right? It's very difficult to bring a product to the European market, right? You can bring a product to the German market, that's one thing. Then you have to change it to go to Italy. You have to change it again to go to France. No longer in the European, you change it to go to the UK. And, some European countries are the Wild West. Oh, it's super easy to bring a product here. We don't really care what you do. And then there's other ones that are extremely difficult to get in. Austria is particularly difficult to get into. So those are, the uniformity. The grid is the same frequency and the same voltage. But why is it everything's so difficult to be non-European, right? I thought it was again, I'm American. I thought it was the EU. And I can even see it in the States, right? California likes to be their own way, and so does New York City, or New York. They like to be the keeping uniform grids and the requirements to go in there from the government standpoint is a huge advantage. It really, in the U.S., right? It's basically one grid across the U.S. and except Texas, but they're all the same and they have the same requirements. Again, inside the EU. Every nation state has their own special thing that they want, and it's a disadvantage. It really is, and we luckily came into Europe, and we manufacture in Europe now because it was mostly for shipping, right? So we can be in Europe making the product that gets used in Europe instead of shipping it on a boat from Mexico or India. So we did manufacturing in Europe for that reason. And it's wildly successful. We need more of that, more manufacturing where it actually gets used. And then, we opened engineering centers here. And you said before how doing the manufacturing leads to the innovation. I completely agree with that, right? As a guy that grew up doing manufacturing, now to be in my position that I am now, it's like you learn a lot when you're doing manufacturing, right? It has to work all the time. And so that's a big advantage, that doing that here, it really teaches the people growing up how to actually, produce products and develop and that kind of stuff.
Thank you very much. So shaping a truly European internal market is very much what the European Commission is pushing for, but not just that. Kerstin, can I ask you for a wrap up and some takeaways that you have from this round of discussion?
Okay, I have 3 takeaways. The first is that if inverters are the brain, the nervous system is the grid, and we have to see it together. My second takeaway is that, if ever the twin transition was a very meaningful concept, it's in this area. Because sometimes we say, it's the green and the digital transition, but they work together. And I think what you've explained today is very much it works together, and we have to look at it together. And I like your 3 criteria, sustainability, resilience, cyber security. This is really what it's about in helping for the industry, which obviously we hope will grow in Europe, and will also be able to satisfy the growing demand, not only for inverters as such, because solar panels and solar deployment is raising, but also because it's the new way of building this renewable grid, which is very different from the grids that we've known so far. My third point is the EU and the US. First of all, the perceptions you have that it's all super complicated in the single market are actually not backed up by research. Because research says that doing business cross-border in the US is 20% more complicated and more cost than actually doing it in the EU. Maybe different for some reason for inverters, but overall, the single market is more integrated and it's easier to do business. When it comes to the IRA, in fact, we are doing something here also about manufacturing. The Net Zero Industry Act, the revised version of the state aid framework, actually allows to also support manufacturing, and it's not only geared to the innovation part. By the way, we have the biggest innovation budget in the world, only saying that as well, on the single market. And when it comes to raw materials, we do collaborate with the US and a couple of other countries, strategic partnerships. We're doing them. We're actually negotiating. We've concluded 4, and we're negotiating a couple of dozen, certainly a dozen more of these. And they are very interesting new formats because they are building on the business case. So someone has the raw materials and wants to make a business case out of that. There are off-takers who need the raw materials, and you need to bring together the two together. And this is where European off-takers are actually very interesting for these resource-rich countries, because they bring technical know-how, they bring skilling on site, they bring kind of long-term relationships where you can also think about recycling, refining, next stage on the value chain. And we see that both for developed countries like Canada, we have an agreement, but also for emerging countries like Namibia, where we also have an agreement, it actually works quite well. And in that sense, Europe is doing, the IRA starts with a business case, and so does the European policies. But we do it in a different way because obviously Europe is a single market, but not a nation. So we don't have a state budget and we don't have tax breaks. What the US can do, what we cannot do, but the focus on the business case and what you've described here is that the inverter business is a beautiful business case. So we're also focusing on that.
Thanks very much. And that is also something we take away, that you are also focusing on inverters when it comes to industrial strategy. So thanks very much for being here, everyone. My task is now to wrap this up and close. And for that, I would like to hand over, thank you, to you, this paper where we tried to summarize everything and, go into a little bit more detail than what we were able to do here in this round, what it needs. So first of all, indeed, we need to have inverters being taken up truly in the industrial strategy. We need to look at cybersecurity. That is incredibly important. And we need to have the right regulatory framework so that inverters can do, what they need to do to the fullest extent, stabilize the grid, manage the system, and just contribute to making this energy transition a reality. Thanks very much to everyone.